Welcome to our new series, exploring the natural wonders of America's national parks and monuments. In this installment, we delve into the unique landscape of Badlands National Park, located in South Dakota. Known for its dramatic rock formations, expansive grasslands, and rich biodiversity, Badlands National Park offers visitors a glimpse into the rugged beauty and ecological diversity that define this iconic American frontier wilderness. Discover the geological wonders, fascinating history, and ongoing conservation efforts that make Badlands National Park a cherished part of our nation's natural heritage. The early history of the area, now known as Badlands National Park, remains largely mysterious. We do not know when humans first arrived in the Badlands Black Hills region. The oldest known Native American site in western South Dakota is located in the Angostura Basin, south of Hot Springs, and dates back over 7,000 years. Evidence suggests that these early inhabitants were hunters who pursued mammoths, large bison, and other big game animals that thrived in the post-glacial grasslands. Archaeological discoveries, including fire pits with artifacts, have been made in the Pinnacles area of the national park. Radiocarbon dating shows that hunters were using this site by 900 AD, and ongoing research may reveal that humans inhabited the Badlands even earlier. Since around 1000 AD, various nomadic Native American tribes have lived in the Black Hills area. Some of these tribes primarily hunted, while others relied on local plants for food. These tribes likely belong to language groups such as the Athabascan, Kiowa, and Shoshonean. In the 18th century, the Arikara people from the Missouri River hunted buffalo as far west as the Black Hills, where they encountered the Comanche, Arapaho, Kiowa, and Cheyenne at trade fairs. At these fairs, they obtained horses, which they then traded with the Oglala and Sechanhu Lakota. These tribes have been gradually moving south and west from the headwaters of the Mississippi River since about 1670. By around 1775, the Oglala and Sechanhu had settled west of the Missouri River in the Bad River and White River areas, respectively. This move from wooded areas to plains significantly altered their way of life. With the acquisition of guns from Europeans and horses from other tribes, the Sioux became nomadic and relied heavily on buffalo for their livelihood. For more than a century before 1763, the upper Missouri Valley, including what is now Badlands National Park, was under French control. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 transferred French lands west of the Mississippi River to Spain. In 1800, Spain secretly returned the area, known as Louisiana, to the French. And then, in 1803, the United States purchased this vast region from France for $15 million, a transaction known as the Louisiana Purchase, which included all of present-day Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota, as well as parts of 8 other states. French-Canadian trappers referred to the region, including the current national park borders, known by a French phrase meaning "bad lands to travel across" in English. This term was later shortened to "bad lands" and applied to any prairie area with a difficult terrain. The Dakota Indians called the area Makosika, which also translates to bad land. Father Pierre-Jean de Smet referred to the White River as Mankazita Wapa, meaning White Earth River, or more precisely, Smoking Land River. He attributed the name to the whitish slime in the river waters. American trappers and traders brought attention to the unique geological features and extensive fossil deposits of the Badlands along the White River. The first known description of the area, likely the White River Badlands, was provided by James Clyment, a member of Jedediah Smith's expedition in 1823. Clyment described it as a barren, rugged landscape with loose gray soil that became thick and adhesive in the rain. In 1834, Maximilien Prince Ovid, after traveling up the Missouri River with Charles Bodmer, received a description of the Badlands from William Laidlaw, a trader at Fort Pierre. The German prince wrote about the region's strange formations, likening them to fortresses, churches, villages, and ruins, and noted the presence of bighorn sheep. Father Nishmet visited the Badlands in 1848 and described the area as extraordinarily unique, with formations resembling villages and ancient castles, as if from another world and a completely new time period. He also noted the region's infertile soil, which likely never would support farming, but believed its fossil deposits would interest geologists and naturalists. In the 1840s, the discovery of fossils in the White River Badlands piqued the interest of scientists in the eastern United States. In the fall of 1843, Alexander Culbertson, a prominent fur trader with the American Fur Company, traveled from Fort Pierre to Fort Laramie. During this journey, or on subsequent ones, he gathered fossils and bones from the Badlands. This collection formed the basis for the first scientific description of a Badlands fossil, written by Dr. Hiram A. Prout of St. Louis and published in 1846. Prout's work described a fragment of the lower jaw of a large rhinoceros-like animal, later named Titanothere by Dr. Joseph Leidy in 1852. Leidy also described another fossil, a fragment of an ancestral camel, from the same collection in 1847, marking the beginning of his prominent career in paleontology. In 1847, the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia received a significant collection of fossils from this region. The following year, Joseph Culbertson, Alexander's father, sent additional fossils to the Academy, which included a new mammalian fossil genus. This sparked further interest, prompting U.S. geologist David Dale Owen to send his assistant, Dr. John Evans, to the Badlands in 1849. Evans, accompanied by a team including a French artist, traveled from Fort Pierre to the Badlands. This artist documented the journey, describing the surreal landscape and the rich deposits of fossil remains. They found well-preserved fossils, including petrified turtles and various animal bones, despite not finding the petrified men that they had hoped for. Evans himself was struck by both the scenic and scientific significance of the Badlands. He described the dramatic landscape and the wealth of fossils that revealed a rich prehistoric past. His observations highlighted the area's unique geological formations and the abundance of fossilized remains from extinct species. Evans drew a map of the region, and Dr. Joseph Leidy later cataloged and illustrated the significant fossils discovered by Owen's survey team. In 1853, geologists Dr. F.B. Hayden and F.B. Meek visited the Badlands, spending several days at Sage Creek and collecting numerous fossils. In 1855, General William S. Harney's expedition against the Sicanhu Sioux traversed the Badlands, accompanied by Lieutenant G.K. Warren and Dr. Hayden. Warren mapped the trail, and Hayden's team collected significant fossil specimens, continuing to contribute to the scientific understanding of the region. The Smithsonian and other institutions, such as Yale and Princeton, continued to make important fossil collections in the Badlands. In 1874, Dr. O.C. Marsh from Yale led an expedition into the region, facing hostility from local Native American tribes due to tensions over the discovery of gold in the Black Hills. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, large herds of bison, elk, antelope, and deer roamed the Badlands. However, droughts, hunting, and settlement significantly reduced their numbers. And by the early 1900s, predators such as coyotes, wolves, and bears had also largely disappeared due to extermination programs. Their fossils may one day be discovered, much like the extinct fauna found in the fossils of the Old West era. Western Dakota, including the Badlands, was part of the Great Sioux Reservation established by the Fort Laramie Treaties. The area opened to white settlement in 1876, and by 1890, the land between the White and Cheyenne Rivers, including the Badlands, was restored to public domain. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, prominent figures, such as artist Frederick Remington, documented the Badlands' unique landscape and the struggles of the Native American tribes. Remington's accounts, along with his scientific explorations, helped bring attention to the region's geological and cultural significance. The foundations of American homesteading were laid before the Civil War, but the Badlands didn't see significant settlement until the early 1900s. A drove of optimistic ranchers, including immigrants from Europe and people from the eastern U.S., traveled to South Dakota seeking new opportunities. White settlement in the Badlands was gradual. In the 1890s, the area was mainly used for grazing by cattlemen and their livestock. During this time, the government conducted surveys of the region. Bruce Seiberts, a cowboy from Dakota, visited the Badlands several times in the early 1890s. Seiberts became familiar with the Badlands while tracking cattle thieves who had hidden there. After his cattle were stolen, he pursued the thieves into the Badlands. Although he couldn't recover his cattle, he saw thousands of unbranded livestock. Returning home, he later revisited the area with a friend, capturing and branding unbranded horses, which they sold for $600. On another solo trip, Seiberts lost his horses to outlaws, but managed to escape by taking the horse of a notorious cattle rustler. Due to the Badlands' isolation from major transportation routes, few settlers moved into the region until railroads arrived. In 1907, the Chicago and Northwestern Railway and the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad extended their lines through the area, significantly increasing accessibility. In 1906, there was a surge in homestead activity under the 1862 Homestead Act, despite the scantness of the standard 160-acre plots for farming in the region. Lionel Jensen, a longtime resident, recalled that by the autumn of 1906, homestead shacks dotted nearly every quarter section of land as settlers anticipated the arrival of the railroads. The residency requirement for proving ownership was reduced from 5 years to 3 in 1912, and the enlarged Homestead Act of 1909 allowed settlers to claim 320 acres by 1915. Further liberalization came with the 1916 Stock Raising Homestead Act, which permitted 640-acre homesteads for non-irrigable grazing lands. Western South Dakota's population grew from 44,000 in 1900 to 58,000 by 1905, reaching 140,000 by 1910. This growth continued at a slower pace through 1930. Pennington County's population slightly increased from 12,000 to 20,000 by 1930. Jackson County, which lacked urban centers, saw a smaller increase. But by 1960, Pennington County had 58,000 residents, while Jackson County had 2,000. The majority of Badlands National Monument lied in Pennington County, with the eastern section in Jackson County. From 1910 to 1920, more land in western South Dakota transitioned from public to private ownership. High prices for farm and ranch products during World War I encouraged settlers to take advantage of the liberalized homestead laws. By 1922, less than half of the land that would become Badlands National Monument remained publicly owned. In 1929, the South Dakota Department of Agriculture advertised the Badlands as the Wonderlands, highlighting its scenic and recreational appeal. The standard homestead size of 160 acres was too small to sustain a family in the semi-arid environment. Cattle and crops like winter wheat and hay became common in the region. Prompted by various advocates, the South Dakota legislature in 1909 asked the federal government to create a township of Badlands as a national park. On March 16, 1909, A petition read before Congress highlighted the unique and picturesque nature of the area near the White River, emphasizing its value for study and preservation. Despite this, no legislation was introduced for over a decade. In 1919, a U.S. Forest Service report recommended designating the Badlands as a national park, noting the significant increase in tourism. Many visitors traveled via State Route 40 and passenger trains. However, by the end of the year, access to scenic sections of the Badlands Wall from the Washington Highway was becoming restricted by fences, with only a few low passes remaining open. The report suggested constructing a scenic road and campgrounds, which was eventually completed by the state of South Dakota 16 years later. Senator Peter Norbeck was instrumental in the push to establish Badlands National Monument. Born on a farm in Clay County, South Dakota in 1870, Norbeck started his public career in the state Senate in 1908, eventually becoming lieutenant governor and then governor. As governor, he founded a state enterprise program to assist farmers and established Custer State Park. Elected to the U.S. Senate in 1920, Norbeck was involved in farm relief legislation, the Migratory Bird Act of 1929, and securing funds for Mount Rushmore. South Dakota Congressman William Williamson and Charles A. Christopherson also supported Norbeck's efforts. On May 2, 1922, Norbeck introduced a bill to create Wonderland National Park in South Dakota. It proposed setting aside specific townships and allowing the Secretary of the Interior to add donated lands. A similar bill was introduced by Williamson in the House of Representatives. However, neither bill progressed in the 67th Congress. Despite initial opposition, including from the National Park Service itself, Norbeck continued to advocate for the park. He made frequent trips to the Badlands, understanding its scenic value. By the late 1920s, support for the park proposal grew, with local organizations and the State Highway Commission backing it. Norbeck introduced a new bill in 1928, aiming to establish Teton National Park, later revised to Badlands National Monument. The bill authorized land exchanges and required the construction of a state road. After various amendments and debates, the final bill was passed by both houses and signed by President Calvin Coolidge on March 4, 1929, establishing Badlands National Monument. The area included 51,000 acres, with a significant portion in the public domain. Senator Norbeck's persistent efforts were crucial in achieving this designation. The late 1920s were challenging times for western South Dakota, as the region struggled with the economic fallout from World War I. Farmers and ranchers faced financial difficulties due to plummeting prices, leading to widespread bank closures. The situation worsened with the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, compounded by grasshopper infestations, crop failures, and severe drought. The south central and western parts of the state were hit hardest by these calamities. In response, several federal and state programs were launched to assist those in need. The National Park Service leveraged these programs in various ways during the 1930s. In November 1934, NPS Director Arno B. Kammerer recommended to Secretary of the Interior, Harold L. Ikes, that additional land, including parts of Sheep Mountain, be added to the proposed Badlands National Monument. This recommendation aimed to reduce wildlife management issues and administrative challenges. To implement this boundary change, Kammerer suggested 3 actions. 1. Asking the president to issue an executive order withdrawing all involved public lands. 2. Acquiring all privately owned lands through existing federal relief programs. And 3. Requesting Congress to establish the Badlands National Monument with new boundaries. Secretary Ikes approved this proposal, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt temporarily withdrew all unreserved public lands, Pennington, Jackson, Fall River, and Custer counties, for classification and use as a grazing project. The financial hardship of the times was evident in a September 2, 1935 letter from a local rancher's wife, expressing the necessity of selling their land to the government due to crop failure. At that time, the average price offered per acre was just $2.85. To secure congressional approval for the boundary extension, proponents attached a rider to the Taylor Grazing Bill revision, authorizing the enlargement. Although the grazing bill was vetoed in 1935, the rider faced no opposition. The bill was reintroduced and passed in 1936, allowing the president to adjust the national monument's boundary within 5 years, with a maximum area of 250,000 acres. Senator Norbeck tirelessly promoted the area's development until his death in December 1936, securing aid from various governmental relief agencies for land acquisition, road building, and other projects. By early 1938, South Dakota had met all the conditions of Public Law 1021, and the NPS had acquired about 48,000 acres of the authorized 51,000. In July 1938, NPS Director Kammerer requested the Secretary of the Interior to approve the establishment of the National Monument and submit a proclamation to the President. On January 25, 1939, President Roosevelt formally proclaimed the establishment of Badlands National Monument, making it the 77th National Monument and the 151st area in the federal park system, administered by the National Park Service. Relief Administration, Resettlement Administration, Works Progress Administration, and Civilian Conservation Corps were instrumental in developing the Badlands National Monument area under the guidance of the National Park Service. These projects included road resurfacing, grading, and ditching, with around 150 workers employed by early 1937. Notably, the Sheep Mountain Canyon Road underwent major reconstruction in 1937. Another significant project, completed in 1940 by ERA labor under the Public Roads Administration, was the removal of 2 tunnels along the Pinnacle Cedar Pass Road, which were deemed impractical due to width and maintenance issues. ERA projects in the area concluded in July 1940, having accomplished tasks like constructing headquarters buildings, prospecting for water, developing wells, and extensive road improvements. During 1939 and 1940 alone, these efforts employed an average of 150 relief workers. Initially managed by Wind Cave National Park, Badlands operations transitioned under Chief Ranger Howard B. Strickland in 1939. Despite challenges like inadequate living quarters and water shortages at Cedar Pass, plans evolved to establish it as the main headquarters, thanks in part to the land donation by Ben H. Millard in 1941. Water scarcity was mitigated by laying pipes to the White River, ensuring a reliable supply to a new 100,000-gallon reservoir completed by the CCC in 1941. Meanwhile, a new CCC camp at Cedar Pass replaced the original camp at Quinn Table in 1941, facilitating better management of park activities. Badlands National Monument quickly became a popular stop for travelers due to its strategic location near U.S. Highways 14 and 6, which traverse the scenic Black Hills. By 1941, the monument featured 70 miles of roads, with most of the construction done by state and federal authorities. Despite only partially developed roads, the monument drew thousands of visitors who detoured from the main highways to enjoy its natural beauty. In September 1941, it was reported that over 250,000 people had visited Badlands National Monument during the travel season, marking a 30% increase from the previous year. However, the outbreak of World War II in December 1941 significantly impacted operations and visitation. With many CCC members joining the military, projects at the monument ceased. By March 1942, CCC Camp Badlands was closed, with ongoing projects left incomplete. The war also led to a sharp decline in tourist visits, as travel restrictions and priorities shifted towards defense efforts. During World War II, the U.S. Army Air Force took control of 341,000 acres of land on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, which belongs to the Oglala Sioux people. This land, including 337 acres from Badlands National Monument, became a gunnery range used intensively from 1942 to 1945 for air-to-air and air-to-ground gunnery exercises, including bombing practices. After the war, the South Dakota National Guard used parts of the range for artillery training. In 1968, most of the area was deemed surplus by the USAF, with a small portion retained, but no longer in use. The National Park Service then took over the majority of the land. The bombing activities mainly occurred within what is now the Stronghold District. The military cleared the area of people by purchasing or leasing land from individual landowners and the tribe. Targets like old car bodies, painted drums, and large plowed bullseyes were used during the training. Mobile targets, including small aircraft called target drones, and large screens towed by planes. Today, the ground remains littered with bullet casings and some unexploded ordnance. In the 1940s, around 125 families were forcibly relocated from their farms and ranches. Those who stayed nearby had to take cover under tractors to avoid bombs dropped by planes practicing miles away. In interior South Dakota, both the church and the current post office were hit by shells through the roof. Pilots from Ellsworth Air Force Base near Rapid City struggled to stay within the range boundaries, sometimes causing accidents. Fortunately, there was never a civilian casualty, although about a dozen flight crew members died in crashes. Post-war development at Badlands saw gradual progress. By 1946, the custodian's residence at Cedar Pass was completed, with additional prefabricated houses finished in 1953. Modern amenities like commercial power and telephone services were also introduced to the headquarters area in subsequent years. By the mid-1950s, further reductions in the monument's area were proposed and implemented, aiming to streamline management and resolve land use conflicts. Public and expert opinions varied on these adjustments, with stakeholders debating the preservation of grasslands and wildlife habitats versus ranching interests. Through these decades, Badlands National Monument evolved amidst changing landscapes and societal priorities, balancing preservation efforts with local economic interests and broader conservation goals. The monument's name changed to Badlands National Park in 1978. In today's era, Badlands National Park offers two main campgrounds for overnight stays: Cedar Pass and Sage Creek. Cedar Pass also provides modern cabins and full-service dining options. For visitor services, the Ben Rifle Visitor Center hosts a bookstore, special programs, and museum exhibits, while the White River Visitor Center in the South Unit focuses on the area's Lakota heritage. Covering a quarter of the park, the Badlands Wilderness was designated in 1976. Here, there are no marked trails, allowing camping anywhere across the vast, pristine mixed prairie landscape, the largest of its kind left in the United States. Managed by the National Park Service, the wilderness prohibits hunting and motorized vehicles, including bicycles. It's strictly preserved under the 1964 Wilderness Act, barring roads, buildings, logging, or mining. The park hosts a diverse array of wildlife, such as badgers, prairie dogs, coyotes, pronghorns, porcupines, deer, and the swift fox, alongside a variety of bird species and reptiles, such as the mountain bluebird and prairie rattlesnake, respectively. Bison, introduced in 1963 with numbers around 50, now number over 1,200, expanding their habitat by 22,000 acres in 2019. The bighorn sheep population has also grown significantly, now totaling 233 individual animals. Two endangered species, the black-footed ferret and whooping crane, are also found here. The ferret population has rebounded to about 100 individuals, but the whooping crane population is not self-sustaining in the park. The park currently encompasses approximately 1.3 million acres, including 243,000 acres of the park itself and surrounding areas. It features 23 vegetation types and 10 land use classes, shaping its diverse ecosystems. Defined by its expansive grasslands, the park's mixed grass prairies range from ankle-high to waist-high grasses. Dominated by western wheatgrass, these prairies support a variety of plant life, although trees and shrubs are less common. Badlands National Park faces challenges from oil and gas development, potentially impacting its ecological integrity. This includes concerns over pipeline breaches affecting local ecosystems and wildlife. Initially established to protect its fossil-rich landscapes, the park has faced issues with fossil theft by visitors and poachers seeking personal or financial gain. The park is also embroiled in debates over Native American land rights, particularly regarding the Oglala Lakota Sioux tribe's historical sacred lands. Efforts are underway to create a tribal national park within the park's southern unit, aimed at returning management and economic benefits to the tribe. Looking ahead to 2050, the park anticipates significant climate changes, including shifts in temperature, precipitation patterns, and the likelihood of droughts. The National Park Service has developed management strategies to address these challenges, focusing on native species, bison populations, and preserving archaeological and paleontological sites. In preparation for these changes, the park employs different management approaches, categorized as no gainer, no regrets, and no brainer, aiming to adapt effectively to future environmental conditions while preserving its natural and cultural resources. Badlands National Park is a piece of American frontier legacy, after all.